The sprawling streets of Neo-Tokyo were alive with sounds, alien dialects mingling with human languages, the hum of levitating vehicles, and the constant buzz of neon signs that bathed everything in fluorescent hues. Amid the noise and chaos, Captain Riker Kane, a former elite soldier of the Intergalactic Peace Corps, moved through the crowd with a purposeful stride. His hard eyes scanned the vibrant but dangerous marketplace, the weight of years spent in combat still visible in his every movement. Kane had walked away from the battlefield years ago, determined to live a quiet life, but the universe didn't let people like him retire easily. His hand brushed against the hidden blade at his belt. Habit from countless missions. As he wandered deeper into the maze of stalls, something stopped him. A faint whimper. Curiosity sparked, and before he knew it, Kane was following the sound. He found himself at a small clearing, surrounded by merchants selling rare, illicit wares. His eyes settled on a sight that made his stomach tighten. The young alien girl, her green-tinted skin bruised and shackled, standing on a platform like an auctioned item. Fresh merchandise, bellowed the auctioneer, his reptilian features twisted in a cruel grin. This beauty from the Androsian system is yours for the right price. The girl's golden eyes met Kane's, wide with fear but containing a spark of something deeper. Hope. It was a plea that echoed through him. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of civilians trapped in war zones he once fought to liberate. Before the crowd could break into bids, Kane's voice cut through the noise. 100,000 credits, he said, his tone cold and commanding. The crowd fell silent, turning to the unexpected bidder. The auctioneer, stunned for a moment, quickly regained his composure and sneered. A generous offer, but surely you're aware there are no refunds here. Kane's eyes narrowed. You'll take it, or I'll make sure this whole operation burns. The reptilian auctioneer hesitated but relented with a toothy grin. Sold then. Kane approached the girl and released her from the energy cuffs. She hesitated, as if not believing she was truly free, until he whispered, "You're safe now." And just like that, the path he thought he had left behind came rushing back, because he knew that taking her wouldn't be the end. It would be just the beginning of a journey filled with dangerous enemies who wouldn't let her escape so easily. As Kane guided the alien girl through the crowded market streets, tension hummed in the air. He kept his hand close to the blade at his belt, every muscle in his body alert. She stumbled slightly, unsteady after being freed from the weight of captivity. He caught her arm gently but firmly, steadying her. "Do you have a name?" Kane asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the din. She hesitated, golden eyes flickering with uncertainty. "Nira," she whispered. "Nira," Kane repeated, as if committing it to memory. "We need to move quickly." They wove through the market's narrow paths, where stalls displayed shimmering artifacts and smuggled technology. Kane scanned the faces of passers-by, looking for signs of trouble. It didn't take long to confirm his suspicions. There, near the edge of the plaza, were men in dark coats, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats, watching them too closely. They weren't local merchants, they were hunters. Kane's grip on Nira's hand tightened. "We're being followed." Nira's expression remained stoic, but her posture gave away the fear simmering beneath the surface. "They won't stop," she murmured, her voice brittle. "They sold me once. If they catch me again, they'll make sure no one ever tries to free me." Kane's jaw clenched. He had been foolish to think they could walk away from the market unnoticed. Buying Nira's freedom was a public declaration of defiance, and those who profited from the trade weren't going to let that slide. "Stay close," Kane ordered, steering them into a dimly lit alley. He knew the market well enough to understand that shadows were safer than open streets. But the hunters were fast, and soon they heard heavy footsteps closing in behind them. Kane turned a corner sharply, pulling Nira with him into an abandoned side street. He pressed her back against the cold wall and whispered urgently, "We're going to have to fight." Her eyes widened, uncertainty clouding her expression. "But," No time to hesitate. Kane's gaze was fierce but steady. When I say run, you run. Don't stop. Don't look back. Understand? Nira gave a small, reluctant nod. Just as Kane finished speaking, two figures appeared at the mouth of the alley. One was human, his cybernetic arm glinting under the faint neon light. The other was a towering alien, a beast-like mercenary whose spiked armor clinked as he moved. Both had the cold, predatory expressions of seasoned trackers. Well, the human sneered, a grin spreading across his scared face. I figured the auction was too good to be true. Now we have to collect her the hard way. Kane positioned himself between Nira and the hunters. You're not taking her. The beast-like alien cracked his knuckles, a low growl rumbling from his throat. You're outnumbered, old man. Walk away while you still can. Kane's lips curved into a humorless smile. You don't know who you're dealing with. The human hunter chuckled. You're Kane, aren't you? I've heard the stories. How you took down whole pirate fleets. But that was years ago. You've slowed down, and now you're trying to play the hero. Without warning, the beast lunged, swinging a massive fist toward Kane's head. But Kane moved like a shadow, ducking, sidestepping, and delivering a swift punch to the alien's ribs. The mercenary grunted in pain, staggering backward, and Kane followed up with a sharp kick that sent the alien crashing into a stack of crates. The human drew a blaster, but Kane was faster. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, disarming the hunter with a precise strike to the wrist. The weapon clattered to the ground. Run, Nira, Kane shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Nira hesitated for only a fraction of a second before darting down the alley. Kane blocked the path of the remaining hunter, giving her the time she needed to escape. The cybernetic man snarled, throwing a wild punch with his mechanical arm. Kane ducked, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it hard. With a satisfying crunch, the cybernetic arm sparked and jerked uselessly to the side. Kane slammed the man into the wall and knocked him out cold with a brutal elbow to the jaw. Kane glanced down the alley, catching a glimpse of Nira as she vanished into the night. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. The beast-like alien was already rising, fury burning in his eyes. Kane knew he couldn't linger. He retrieved the blaster from the ground and leveled it at the alien. Don't follow us, he warned, his voice deadly calm. The alien growled but backed away, clutching his injured side. This isn't over, Kane, he snarled. You just made some very dangerous enemies. Kane didn't respond. He turned and disappeared into the shadows, knowing full well the danger he had just invited. The black market never forgave, and they would stop at nothing to reclaim what they believed was theirs. Kane and Nira ran through the twisting alleys of Neo-Tokyo, their footsteps muffled by the damp pavement. The neon lights of the market were long behind them, and they moved deeper into the underbelly of the city, a place where even the shadows had secrets. Rain began to fall, light at first but quickly growing into a steady downpour that drenched their clothes and slicked the streets. Kane glanced over his shoulder, making sure they weren't being followed. For now, it seemed they had escaped the hunters, but he knew it wouldn't be long before the black market sent more dangerous men. The kind that didn't stop until they completed their mission. This way, Kane said, leading Nira into an old, crumbling building that looked abandoned. It wasn't much, but it was dry, and it would have to do for the night. Inside, the building was cold and smelled of mildew. Rusted machinery lined the walls, remnants of a time when this part of the city had been an industrial hub. Kane found a stack of tattered blankets in the corner and spread one on the ground, gesturing for Nira to sit. She lowered herself slowly, exhaustion evident in her every movement. For the first time since Kane had freed her, she allowed herself to relax, though her eyes remained wary. Kane sat across from her, pulling off his damp jacket and tossing it aside. "Why did you help me?" Nira asked, her voice soft and hesitant. It was the first real question she had dared to ask since the market. Kane leaned back against the wall, his expression unreadable. "I know what it's like to be trapped," he said simply. "No one should live in chains." Nira studied him for a moment, her golden eyes flickering in the dim light. "But you know they won't stop looking for me. You've put yourself in danger for someone you don't even know." Kane gave a small shrug. "Danger and I have been old friends for a long time." He tilted his head slightly, meeting her gaze. "Besides, I'm not going to let them drag you back." Silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of rain pounding against the roof. Kane reached into his belt and pulled out a small packet of food, tossing it to Nira. She caught it awkwardly, her hand still unsteady. "Eat," Kane said. "You'll need your strength." Nira hesitated before tearing the packet open. The food was bland, but she ate quickly, hunger overriding her caution. Kane watched her quietly, noticing the scars on her wrists where the energy cuffs had bitten into her skin. She had been through more than he could imagine, and yet she was still here, still fighting to survive. When Nira finished eating, she wrapped one of the tattered blankets around her shoulders, her small frame barely visible beneath the fabric. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Kane gave her a nod, but he knew gratitude wouldn't be enough to keep them safe. He had seen too much of the world to believe in easy endings. The black market would come after them with everything they had, and he needed a plan if they were going to stay ahead of their pursuers. "You'll need a new identity," Kane said after a moment. "Something to make it harder for them to track you." "I know someone who can help with that." Nira looked up, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "Who?" Kane's expression darkened slightly. "An old friend, but it's not going to be easy." Before Nira could ask more, Kane stood and checked the window, his sharp gaze scanning the streets below. The rain had driven most people inside, but that wouldn't stop the hunters. They would come, and when they did, Kane needed to be ready. "Get some rest," Kane said without looking back. "We move at dawn." Nira nodded, though sleep seemed like a distant luxury. As she lay down, pulling the blanket tighter around her, Kane remained by the window, his mind racing with thoughts of the dangers ahead. He had walked away from a life of violence once, but it seemed the universe had other plans for him. This time, however, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for Nira, a stranger whose fate had become tangled with his own in a way neither of them could have predicted. And somehow, that made all the difference. The rain still drizzled as dawn broke over Neo-Tokyo. Kane stood by the cracked window, watching the dim light creep across the city skyline. Behind him, Nira stirred awake, her movements slow and cautious. Kane had barely slept, but his mind was sharper than ever. If they wanted to stay ahead of the hunters, they needed to act fast. "We leave now," Kane said, slipping his jacket back on. "There's someone I trust. Well, sort of. He can get you a new identity." Nira pushed herself upright, clutching the tattered blanket around her shoulders. "You trust him?" she asked with a hint of skepticism. Kane smirked, but there was little humor in it. "Let's just say, he owes me." They left the building under cover of the early morning fog, navigating the deserted back streets where the city's underworld thrived. Nira stayed close to Kane, her golden eyes wide with silent curiosity. Despite the exhaustion lining her face, there was a spark of determination in her. She wasn't the same frightened girl from the auction block. Not entirely. They arrived at a small, nondescript shop wedged between towering apartment buildings. A faded sign above the entrance read, "Arcadian Fixes. We make problems disappear." Kane knocked 3 times, his knuckles rapping against the metal door in a precise rhythm. Few tense moments passed before the door slid open with a hiss. Wiry man with slicked back hair and cybernetic goggles peered out. His grin was sly, showing off a few missing teeth. Well, Riker Kane. I thought you were dead." "Not yet, Rook," Kane replied dryly, stepping inside with Nira close behind. The inside of the shop was cluttered with outdated tech and broken devices, all piled haphazardly on shelves. The place reeked of ozone and burnt circuits, a tinkerer's lair where secrets were bought and sold. Rook leaned against the counter, his goggled eyes whirring as they focused on Nira. "Who's the girl?" Rook asked, his grin widening. "You never struck me as the saving damsels in distress type." Kane shot him a warning glance. "She needs a new identity. Fast." Rook's grin faltered slightly as he straightened up. "New ID, huh? That's expensive work, Kane, and you aren't exactly swimming in credits these days." "Consider it a favor," Kane said coldly. "You still owe me for getting you out of that mess on Trayan 5. Rook groaned, throwing his hands in the air. "I knew you'd bring that up someday." He motioned toward Nira. "Fine. Let's see what we're working with." Nira tensed as Rook approached, his mechanical hands moving quickly to scan her features. Kane gave her a small, reassuring nod. "It's okay," he muttered. "He knows what he's doing." As Rook worked, he muttered to himself, his fingers dancing across a console. "You know, Kane, you've really stepped in it this time. Word is already spreading that the black market wants you both dead. They don't like it when people steal their merchandise." "She's not merchandise," Kane said, his voice sharp and final. Rook chuckled under his breath, but didn't push further. "Suit yourself, but if they find you, they won't care what you call her." After a few minutes, Rook leaned back with a satisfied grin. "Done. New identity uploaded. Nira from Androsian. Never heard of her. As far as anyone's concerned, her name is now Talia Redek, a refugee from the outer colonies." Nira tilted her head, testing the sound of her new name. "Talia. It'll do," Kane said, giving a brief nod. "What's next?" Rook's grin faded slightly. "Look, Kane, getting her a new ID is one thing, but you've pissed off some very dangerous people. You can't stay here. They'll track you both eventually." Kane's expression hardened. "I know." Rook crossed his arms, leaning in slightly. "There's a cargo ship leaving the city tonight. No questions asked, no records kept. I can get you both on it, but it'll cost you." Kane raised an eyebrow. "How much?" "Not credits," Rook replied with a sly smirk. "Information. There's a data shard I need. It's locked away in one of the black market's vaults. You get me that shard, I get you both out of here." Nira shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Kane. "You're asking him to go back to the same people hunting us." "Welcome to Neo-Tokyo, sweetheart," Rook said with a grin. "Nothing's free." Kane clenched his jaw, weighing the risks. Breaking into the black market's vault wasn't just dangerous, it was suicide. But it was their only shot. He looked at Nira, who met his gaze without fear. "We do this together," she said softly. "No more running." Kane's lips twitched into the smallest hint of a smile. "You're learning fast." Rook clapped his hands together. "Excellent. I knew you still had some fight left in you, Kane. I'll send you the details. Just try not to get killed, yeah?" Kane didn't respond. He led Nira back toward the door, his mind already racing through plans. They had a few hours to prepare, and every second counted. The black market wouldn't expect them to hit back, but Kane knew that was their only advantage. As they stepped out into the cold morning air, Nira looked up at Kane. "Why are you doing this? Why not leave me behind?" Kane's expression softened for the briefest moment. "Because no one else ever stood up for me when I needed it," he said quietly. "I won't make the same mistake." Nira gave a small nod, and for the first time since they met, there was something close to a smile on her face. They were no longer just running. They were fighting back. The night air was thick with tension as Kane and Nira approached the heart of the black market, a sprawling underground complex hidden beneath layers of old city infrastructure. Neon signs buzzed quietly, lighting their path as they moved through the shadows. The plan was simple in theory: sneak in, retrieve the data shard for Rook, and slip out before anyone noticed. But Kane knew better than to trust anything to go smoothly. "Stick close and follow my lead," Kane whispered, glancing at Nira. She nodded, her expression calm but her golden eyes gleaming with determination. The black market's vault was guarded by mercenaries, brutal enforcers armed with plasma rifles and cybernetic implants. Kane and Nira watched from the edge of a rooftop, scanning the layout below. The entrance was flanked by 2 guards, and a small patrol unit roamed the perimeter. Kane pulled out a small device from his jacket, a jammer designed to disrupt security feeds temporarily. "We'll have about 10 minutes once we're inside," Kane said. "After that, the cameras come back online, and we're out of luck." Nira crouched beside him, her voice low. "What about the guards?" Kane gave her a faint smile. "That's where you come in." Nira arched a brow. "Me? You're smaller and quicker than I am," Kane explained. "We need to create a distraction. I'll take care of the patrol. Your job is to get the guards at the entrance to leave their post. Can you do that?" Nira gave him a thoughtful look, then a determined nod. "I'll figure it out." They moved quickly, slipping down from the rooftop and into the shadows surrounding the complex. Kane tapped a few commands on his jammer, and the security cameras blinked offline. "Now," he whispered. Nira darted toward the entrance, her light steps barely making a sound on the slick pavement. She spotted a stack of metal crates nearby and gave them a hard shove. The crates toppled with a loud crash, scattering across the ground. The guards at the entrance swore loudly, their attention snapping toward the noise. One of them barked orders into his com, and the 2 ran off to investigate. Kane moved in, fast and silent. He slipped past the empty entrance and into the building's dimly lit interior. Nira joined him moments later, her breathing steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "Nice work," Kane muttered, leading the way deeper into the vault. The corridors were narrow, lined with old machinery and flickering lights. Kane knew the black market's vault was somewhere below, hidden behind multiple layers of security. They reached a locked door with a keypad, and Kane pulled out a small hacking device, connecting it to the control panel. "Keep watch," Kane whispered as he worked, his fingers flying across the device's interface. Nira stood by the corridor, her sharp eyes scanning for movement. Every creak of metal and distant footstep put her on edge. Time was running out, and they both knew the guards would return soon. The keypad beeped softly, and the door slid open. Kane slipped through, with Nira close behind. Inside was the vault, a room filled with rare artifacts, stolen technology, and encrypted data shards. "Find the shard labeled AR-46, Kane instructed, his eyes sweeping across the shelves. Nira moved quickly, scanning each row until she spotted a small metallic case marked with the code they were searching for. "Got it," she whispered, grabbing the shard and handing it to Kane. He tucked it into his jacket, his gaze flicking toward the door. "Let's move." But just as they turned to leave, the door hissed open, and 3 mercenaries stormed in, weapons drawn. Kane shoved Nira behind a stack of crates as plasma bolts flew past them, scorching the walls. "No running this time," Kane muttered, drawing his blade from his belt. With a swift, practiced motion, he lunged toward the first mercenary, disarming him with a brutal twist of the wrist. The second attacker fired a shot, but Kane dodged, slamming the first mercenary into the second with enough force to knock them both off balance. Nira watched from her hiding spot, heart pounding. She knew Kane was outnumbered and couldn't hold them off alone for long. Thinking fast, she spotted an old power conduit running along the wall. A spark of an idea formed. "Kane, get down," she shouted. Kane ducked just as Nira yanked a loose cable from the conduit, sending a surge of electricity crackling through the room. The mercenaries convulsed as the jolt hit them, their weapons clattering to the ground. Kane blinked, glancing back at Nira with a look of approval. "Not bad," he said, a grin flickering across his face. "Come on," Nira urged. They sprinted out of the vault and back into the corridors, moving as quickly as their legs could carry them. Alarms blared, and red lights flashed, signaling that their time was up. Kane glanced at his jammer. 2 minutes before the security feeds came back online. They needed to be gone by then, or every mercenary in the black market would be on their heels. They reached the exit just as the guards from the entrance returned, their weapons raised. Kane didn't hesitate. He tossed a small smoke grenade, and thick clouds billowed through the air, giving them the cover they needed to escape. "Go," Kane shouted, grabbing Nira's hand and pulling her through the smoke. They burst out into the night, rain splashing against their faces as they ran through the alleys of Neo-Tokyo. The sound of shouting faded behind them, but Kane knew it wouldn't be long before the hunters regrouped. They ducked into a hidden alcove, panting from the exertion. Kane checked the data shard in his jacket, ensuring it was still intact. "We did it," Nira breathed, her voice filled with a mix of disbelief and excitement. Kane gave her a nod, his expression serious. "It's not over yet. We still need to get to Rook and make sure the cargo ship leaves on time." Nira met his gaze, and for the first time since they met, there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance at freedom. Kane allowed himself a rare smile. "You did good, kid." Nira's lips curved into a small smile in return. "You too, old man." And with that, they disappeared into the night, knowing that the real fight was only just beginning. Kane and Nira arrived at Arcadian Fixes just as the sky over Neo-Tokyo began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. The rain had slowed, but the city remained cloaked in mist, giving everything an eerie, dreamlike quality. Kane knocked on the metal door, his knuckles sharp and urgent. The door slid open, and Rook greeted them with a grin. "Well, well, look who made it back in one piece." Kane didn't waste time. He tossed the data shard onto the counter. "We did our part. Now get us on that cargo ship." Rook picked up the shard, inspecting it with a gleam of satisfaction. "Nice work, Kane. I have to say, I didn't think you'd pull it off." Kane's eyes narrowed. "The ship leaves tonight, right?" Rook gave a lazy shrug. "Yeah, about that." Kane tensed. Something was wrong. Before Kane could react, a group of heavily armed men stormed in from a back room, their weapons trained on him and Nira. Kane's blade was in his hand in an instant, but Rook held up a hand, grinning slyly. "Easy there, old friend. No need to get violent." Nira stepped closer to Kane, her golden eyes filled with confusion and anger. "You betrayed us." Rook chuckled. "Betrayed? Come on, kid. It's just business. The black market put a hefty bounty on both of you, and I'm not exactly in a position to turn that kind of payday down." Kane's jaw clenched, his mind racing through possible escape routes. He could fight, but there were too many guns, and Nira was unarmed. They were cornered. "The way I see it," Rook continued, "I can either cash in on that bounty, or you can give me a better offer." Kane glared at him. "You know we don't have anything." Rook grinned wider. "Oh, but you do. The girl. She's rare, very rare. Hand her over, and I'll forget this ever happened." Kane's blood boiled. He had fought his entire life to stop people like Rook, and now, after everything, this scumbag was offering to sell Nira again. "Over my dead body." Rook sighed dramatically. "That's disappointing, Kane. Really, it is. Guess I'll have to do this the hard way." The guards raised their weapons, and Kane knew there was no time left for subtlety. He grabbed Nira's hand. "Get ready," he whispered. And then, all hell broke loose. Kane's blade flashed as he lunged forward, cutting down the nearest guard before they had time to fire. Plasma bolts filled the air, sizzling past Kane and Nira as they darted for cover behind a wall of old machinery. Kane returned fire with the blaster he had taken from the vault, each shot precise and deadly. "Run, Nira!" Kane shouted over the chaos. But Nira didn't run. Instead, she grabbed a heavy pipe from the ground and swung it hard, catching a guard across the face. The man crumpled, unconscious. Kane felt a flicker of pride, but there was no time to savor it. More guards were rushing in, and they were running out of options. "This way," Nira shouted, spotting a service exit at the back of the shop. They sprinted toward it, dodging plasma fire. Rook cursed from behind the counter. "Stop them. Don't let them leave." Kane kicked open the exit door, and they burst into the alley beyond. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, local authorities responding to the commotion. But Kane knew better than to rely on help from the law. The black market had too many connections, too many bribes in place. If they were going to survive, they had to get out on their own. "There's a transport depot nearby," Kane said, panting as they ran. "If we can reach it, we can steal a ship and get out of this city." Nira kept pace beside him, her expression hard and determined. "Then let's go." They raced through the back streets, the sound of pursuit close behind them. Kane's muscles burned, but he pushed himself harder, knowing that if they stopped for even a second, it would be over. At the transport depot, a sleek cargo ship sat unattended, its engines humming quietly. Kane's heart pounded with relief. "We're almost there." But just as they reached the loading ramp, Rook appeared, his blaster drawn. "End of the line, Kane." Kane stepped in front of Nira, shielding her with his body. "You don't want to do this, Rook." Rook sneered. "Oh, but I do. You should have taken the deal when you had the chance." Before Rook could pull the trigger, Nira moved. With lightning speed, she grabbed a loose fuel canister from the ground and hurled it at Rook's feet. The canister exploded on impact, sending flames roaring between them. Kane didn't hesitate. "Go," he shouted, pulling Nira up the loading ramp. They dashed into the cockpit, and Kane activated the ship's launch sequence. Engines roared to life as the cargo ship lifted off the ground, breaking free from the confines of Neo-Tokyo. Plasma bolts streaked past the windows, but the ship's shields held. As they soared into the sky, Kane leaned back in his seat, exhaling a long breath. For the first time in days, they were free. The stars stretched endlessly before them as the cargo ship left Neo-Tokyo's atmosphere and entered the calm silence of space. Kane glanced at Nira, who sat quietly beside him, her golden eyes staring out into the vast expanse. "What now?" she asked softly. Kane gave a small, tired smile. "We find somewhere safe, somewhere they can't find us." Nira nodded, though she knew as well as Kane that true safety might be a fantasy. But for the first time since they met, there was hope. A chance to build a new life far from the chains of the past. "You could have left me," Nira said after a moment. "Why didn't you?" Kane looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Because everyone deserves a second chance," he said quietly. "Even me." Nira smiled, a real, genuine smile. It was small, but it was enough. Together, they set a course for the unknown, leaving behind the dangers of Neo-Tokyo and the black market. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it side by side. And for the first time in a long time, Kane felt something he thought he had lost forever: peace.